Utpatti Prakarana, The Origin, Chapter 1, The Story of Akashaja. It's difficult to imagine that the same spot was covered totally with spotless snow a few weeks before, that the plant or animal life was practically non-perceptible, that the hills of snow would ever support any life except the coniferous trees which stand bearing witness to all that happens here. But presently, the once desolate and cold ground has received the warmth from the bright sun, allowing the life processes to start. The thick, soft, alive carpet of crocuses, of the lemon yellow flowers on the ground is a proof to this. The other trees, which were bald and leafless in winter, are laden with flowers. Apple trees are dressed in light pink blossoms, the cherry and the pears with white ones. There is a very pleasant smell in the atmosphere, as if Mother Nature is dressed up for the divine celebration. The hibernating life is slowly waking up, nay, stretching. The whole valley is reverberating with the sound of birds which have returned. The exhilaration in their tone is suggestive that they may be exchanging stories of their adventure during the migratory period. The spring is here. Very few places in our great country exhibit such distinct change of seasons. The place is the Valley of Kashmir. Nature has many lessons to teach for a receptive learner. Through the phenomenon of regularity in planetary movement or the social behavior of the animals, but the readiness and receptivity stand as the great sentinels guarding the palace of understanding. Only a very few persons are able to befriend these sentinels and to seek entry into the place. Carlos Castaneda, a graduate student of anthropology from the University of California, Los Angeles, met an old Yaqui Indian whom he calls Don Juan and spent many years of apprenticeship under him. He learned many deeper aspects of life. He has documented the meetings in a series of books. The meetings mostly took place in some breathtaking scenic spots, and the teachings are based on the observation of natural phenomena. When Carlos presented the first copy of the book to the master, a very interesting conversation followed. Carlos said that he had been receiving letters from many persons voicing their opinion that it is wrong to write on the apprenticeship, and that perhaps he was revealing things he should not. Don Juan said that it does not matter what one reveals, or what one keeps to oneself, and that everything we do, everything we are, depends on our personal power. That if we have enough of it, one word uttered to us might change the course of our lives. But if we do not have enough personal power, the most magnificent piece of information or wisdom may be revealed to us, but that revelation will not make the least difference. He then lowered his voice as if he was disclosing a confidential matter to Carlos. I am going to utter perhaps the greatest piece of knowledge anyone can voice. Let me see what you can do with it. Do you know that at this moment you are surrounded by eternity? And do you know that you can use that eternity if you so desire? Do you know that you can extend yourself forever in any of the directions? Do you know that one moment can be eternity? This isn't a riddle. It's a fact, but only if you mount that moment and use it to take the totality of yourself forever in any direction. Staring at Carlos, Don Juarez continued, smiling. You didn't have this knowledge before. Now you do. I have revealed it to you, but it doesn't make a bit of difference because you don't have enough personal power to utilize my revelation. The understanding eludes most of us, while very few amongst us succeed in learning from the book of existence. This is because we waste our precious energy over the trivia of life by taking them seriously and taking those issues lightly on which the very purpose of life rests. We are more than satisfied by engaging ourselves in the toys as called by Sri Ramakrishna, be it struggle for survival or even the search for possessions or craving for name and fame or the madness for power over others. After growing up and discovering the other dimensions of life, one starts observing life in all its intricacies. Only when one becomes a mumukshu by adopting the way of life characterized by shama, santosha and vichara, can one benefit from the truths and hints laid down in this scripture. Because wisdom can dawn only on such a person. Though a scholar may understand intellectually and offer opinions or at the most interpretations, the capacity to transform one's life through such scriptures like Yoga Vasishta is what is meant by Don Juan when he says one should have personal power. The feeling of frustration, depression, misery, laughter and joy are peculiar to human beings. No doubt, the other animals too feel the discomfort or otherwise, but they are not obsessed by these very feelings. These very feelings, the negative as well as the positive, can become instrumental in giving birth to some of the most nagging questions arising in human mind. What is the purpose of this universe and life? What is its origin? Where does it all originate? Having stressed the necessity of preparations sufficiently in the two earlier prakaranas, sage Valmiki proceeds to enter into the detailed teachings of Muni Vasishta through this episode entitled Utpatti Prakarana, or the origin. Mostly, we attribute our happiness and misery to the world outside. It is quite natural that we either get positively involved with it through our attraction when we are happy or by trying to possess it, or we get negatively involved with it through our aversion for it when we become unhappy, as we try to escape from it. The extreme involvement and the resultant misery becomes the starting point for the fundamental questions. The human attempt to seek answers to these questions has formed the science of philosophy. We have also known that most of the explanations offered are less than satisfactory as each view is either partial or may even be a fantasy of the mind. We find innumerable explanations on the origin of the universe, each one more confusing than the other. Science has been the most influential development of the human mind. It says that if we ask the right questions in the right way, the question itself opens the door to the truth. If we go through our ancient literature, we find that this conclusion is only an echo of the depth of understanding of our sages. Some of them asked, who perceives the universe? The answer is obviously I, as behind every possible experience or action. It is there, as I see, I feel, I think, etc. This century has given many a shock to some of the basic conclusions of science, which are so far taken as granted. Objective observation had been the founding principle of science. Theory of relativity, quantum physics, has conclusively proved through a series of experiments and observations that there is nothing like objective observation. A simple illustration is that of a rainbow. Each one of us perceives the rainbow in her or his own way. In other words, the rainbow is unique and personal to each one of us, though we all may be seeing it at the same time. This only means that the rainbow is there for one as long as one perceives it. We may stretch this conclusion a little further, as our sages did. The cause of the perception we call the world is I, or the subject. So the question takes a more fundamental form. How does this I originate? And what is this I? Yoga Vasishta advocates Drishti Srishtivada, which holds that the world exists only so long as it is perceived. Manodrishyam idam sarvam. This whole world is the object perceived by the mind. In other words, whatever is experienced or the world of objects is nothing but a creation of the mind. Standard example is given in Vedanta, as it tries to suggest at this conclusion. Like the vast ocean, comprising of waves, froth, etc., is only water. This world of objects is nothing but I, the perceiver. It should be remembered that all explanations are limited and are never exhaustive. They all have only one practical use, which help the inner growth. If we extend the explanation or similes, we have the danger of getting involved with mere verbal jugglery. In an interesting game called communication, the participants sit in a circle. One person begins by whispering a message to his neighbor, which in turn is conveyed to his neighbor until the message returns to the person who started it. Most of the time, the message is totally distorted. Something very similar happens when there is the perception of the external world. The senses receive the external stimuli, sound, light, touch, taste and smell, and pass them on to the manas. Manas interprets according to its likes and dislikes and either passes it on to buddhi or rejects them if it is not important in its view. Buddhi again understands the stimuli with the help of memory. Such sense perception happens to be the basis of scientific experiments and thus the knowledge in general. According to Vedanta, such experience is still paroksha or indirect because it needs the mediation of at least 4 entities: manas or mind, buddhi or intellect, chitta or memory, and ahankara or the I-ness. All interpretations by mediators are governed by likes and dislikes of the mind, notions and obsessions of the intellect, and pride and prejudice of the ego, which have been termed sankalpa and vikalpa by sage Vasishta. Yet, almost all of us give so much importance to our sense perception that we get ourselves miserably involved with them. This is due to the fact that by very nature, these instruments, senses, manas and buddhi, are necessarily outward extrovertish. Because their very function depends on seeking their corresponding objects. All such objects have been included in the word drishya or the seen in this sarga. And the experiencer has been referred to as drashta or the seer. Like all Vedantic texts, Vasishtha also advocates that Jiva and its grosser companions, Inas, Chitta, Buddhi, Manas, senses and body, are nothing but the manifestations of the non-dual principle. It is only that the Jiva gets so involved with grosser companions that it totally forgets about its own root in the principle. Sri Ramakrishna used to give an example from Puranas to illustrate the power of Maya which creates this forgetfulness. Vishnu incarnated himself as a sow in order to kill the demon Hiranyaksha. After killing the demon, the sow remained quite happy with her young ones, forgetting her real nature. She was suckling them very contentedly. The gods in heaven could not persuade Vishnu to relinquish his sow's body and return to the celestial regions. He was absorbed in the happiness of his beast form. After consulting among themselves, the gods went to sent Shiva to the sow, who asked the sow, "Why have you forgotten yourself?" Vishnu replied through the sow's body, "Why? I am quite happy here." Thereupon, with a stroke of his trident, Shiva destroyed the sow's body and Vishnu went back to heaven. This is from Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. It is like our day-to-day experience of the dream. As long as the dream exists, we never realize that it is unreal. When we are awake, we cannot possibly imagine that there can be any truth in it. And yet, all the characters, scene, and everything else is nothing but the dreamer's creation. Similarly, this universe with all its multiplicity is only a manifestation of the supreme principle. But the mechanism of this manifestation is, however, very mysterious. Once this happens, Jiva gets manifested itself into Sankalpa, conception, which then becomes a Vikalpa, false notion, and finally into the world of multiplicity. The word ornament signifies nothing but the material with which it is made. Similarly, the word universe means Brahman. The entire process of Sankalpa Vikalpa multiplicity has been named as samsara, that which is repetitive like a circle, vicious or virtuous, depending entirely on the approach. That is why it has been called samsara chakra, the wheel of samsara. This must be very obvious form of monotonous nature of our ordinary life, dominated by almost accidental birth, the struggle for survival, and finally death. Sage Vasishtha then proceeded to tell about samsara and the nature of bondage. The involvement of drishta, seer, with the drishya, seen, is bondage, and the lack of it is liberation. The seen, which is the jagat, is the conception of multiplicity of I and you, the prime sankalpa, the root cause of all bondage. The moment all multiplicity merges into the seer, without any remanifestation, the liberation is attained. But the seed of drishya is dormant in the seer himself in the form of samskaras and vasanas. The venerable sage then began his detailed teaching with the story